Welcome to the channel. Today's story is about a mystical incident in Antarctica. May 8, 1965. Carl Robert Disch, a young physicist, stepped out into the endless Antarctic white, and never returned. His footprints led into the snow, confident and deliberate, and then vanished. No storm, no crevice, no trace remained. Strange lights appeared on the horizon. Whispers seemed to rise from the ice. His loyal husky disappeared days later, as if following its master into the unknown. Was it madness, an accident, or something far beyond human understanding? Tonight, we dive into one of the most chilling mysteries of Antarctica, and the story of a man who walked into the void and never came back. Antarctica. A word that sounds like a sentence. A white desert where even darkness seems different, thick, viscous, like ink spilled over the snow. There are no trees, no birds, no sounds of ordinary life. There is only the wind. It howls through the permafrost like an organ in an empty cathedral, and anyone who has ever stayed on this land knows, in its voice, one can hear much. Some hear songs, others, moans. For some, it seems as if the ice itself whispers in their ear, calling them somewhere, promising to reveal something. Antarctica does not like humans. It tolerates them briefly, like a capricious hostess allowing a guest only to peek over the threshold. But the moment you falter, you vanish. The winds erase your tracks, the frost draws the breath from your lungs, and the cracks in the ice swallow your body so completely that it might never be found, even centuries later. Yet it is precisely this danger that draws the bravest, or the most desperate, here. Amid the endless whiteness, at the beginning of May 1965, stood Bird Station, a tiny oasis of human perseverance in a dead desert. The station stood like a lonely lighthouse in an infinite white void. The metal walls of the huts were covered with frost, and icy crystals sparkled, reflecting the dim twilight. The snow lay thick and soft, cracking and crunching underfoot with every step, as if whispering secrets not their own. The wind was merciless. It howled like a living creature, running through valleys and ice fissures, bursting from narrow gorges, lifting snow into the air. The polar explorers pulled their collars and mittens close, yet the cold penetrated to the bone. Each breath cut through the lungs. In this white emptiness, fear merged with awe. Glaciers, immense and impenetrable, stretched across the horizon like frozen giants. Crevices concealed darkness beneath them, ready to swallow anyone who stumbled. But most terrifying was the feeling of being watched. Not by a human, not by a beast, but by something ancient. Sometimes it seemed the ice itself moved, creating new patterns impossible to explain. Within the walls of the station lived and worked people whose task was simple, to study what is beyond comprehension, to record the hum of radio waves, to research the ionosphere, to gaze into the abyss of space while standing at the edge of the world. Among them was he, Carl Robert Disch. A young physicist from a small town in Wisconsin. He was 26. His eyes were clear, his smile light, yet in that smile already hid a shadow of fatigue. Those who worked alongside him said he remained calm, never showing weakness. But in Antarctica, weakness need not be shown, it will reveal itself. And one morning, it made its choice. May 8, 1965, began without dawn, for in these latitudes, true dawn can vanish for weeks. The sky was dull gray, stars fading into the milky haze. The wind battered the station walls, each gust like the strike of an invisible fist. The frost sank to -44, and the air became so heavy and sharp it seemed to cut the lungs from within. At 9:15 a.m., Carl Disch stepped out of the radio laboratory, a small hut a mile from the main complex. He was dressed properly, a fur-lined hood, mittens, felt-lined boots. A flashlight hung from his belt, though in the gray polar twilight it would offer little help. His steps on the hard snow echoed dully, as if the ground beneath were not snow, but hollow. The journey to the station usually took him less than half an hour. A simple path, a safety rope stretched straight to the building. But that day, he did not follow it. The snow preserved his footprints, long, confident strides. They did not lead south, toward the base. They went west, toward the empty and lifeless airstrip beyond the icy horizon. Carl walked steadily, without hesitation. His gait spoke, he knew where he was going. And no one ever saw him again. By 10 a.m., when Carl had still not appeared at the main complex, tension filled the communications room. At first, colleagues assumed he had been delayed in the lab, that perhaps a piece of equipment had malfunctioned. But with every passing minute, with every tick of the clock, an uneasy feeling grew, like the station itself had held its breath. In Antarctica, a delay is not a trivial annoyance. Here, it always signals danger. By 10:30, a search party had been assembled. 2 people rode snowmobiles, the rest on foot. The wind was already picking up, lifting snow into their eyes and mouths, lashing their faces like needles. Visibility was dropping. The world was turning into an endless gray wall, where everything looked the same and nothing had direction. At the radio laboratory, they found the first tracks. Clear imprints of heavy boots, leading away from the ladder. But not in the direction they expected. God, one of the searchers exhaled, raising a mitten to shield his face from the wind. He didn't go to the rope. The tracks go west. Not to the station, not to safety, but toward the airstrip, long abandoned. At first, there was a sense of relief, at least there were tracks, something to follow. But the further they went, the stronger the feeling of strangeness became. The steps were even, confident. No hesitation, no pauses, as if the man was completely calm and walking toward a definite goal. If he were lost, he'd be wandering in circles, said one of the searchers. The tracks would be chaotic. But Disch walked confidently, as if someone was calling him forward. By 11:30, the tracks still stretched on. The weather worsened. Snow filled the cracks between the ice floes, and each step could be the last. Beneath their feet, a black abyss could open. Yet Carl walked here. Alone. In this frozen hell. And then, silence. The tracks ended. No sign of a turn, a fall, or a struggle. Just snow, smooth and undisturbed like a blank sheet. As if the man had walked and vanished. The searchers stood, staring into the void before them, and no one dared speak aloud what each thought. Something about this defied logic. The wind howled louder, as if laughing at them. One of the men whispered in a trembling voice, "He was taken." Another spun around sharply, clenching his mittened fist, "Shut up. Don't talk nonsense." But everyone knew, inside, that thought had taken root, that Carl had not simply lost his way. That it was as if he had been torn from this world. Night fell quickly. Flashlights and vehicle headlights revealed only endless drifts and the occasional black silhouette of a person. The station glowed with warm lights in the distance, but that warmth felt unreal, unreliable. The wind did not cease. It hummed, as if playing a long, drawn-out note on a gigantic organ. In its wails, fragments of words could be heard. One searcher swore he heard Carl's name. Another imagined the wind calling him personally, insistently yet gently, like a mother calling her child home. Exhausted, the men returned to the station. Fear was visible in each of their eyes. It was not fear of death, they were used to danger. It was a different fear, the sense that, in the white desert, something greater existed than cold and wind. In the mess hall, under the dim lamp, they sat in silence. Only one spoke softly, he didn't get lost. He left. But where? And why? There was no answer. Only the crunch of snow beyond the walls, only sounds that could not be called natural. The next morning, the search resumed. The sun still had not risen, only gray twilight stretching across the horizon. Temperatures had fallen even lower, and every breath burned the lungs. They went back to the place where the tracks had vanished yesterday. The snow had already begun to cover the path, but the boot prints were still visible, a silent reminder that someone had walked here. And yet the scene remained the same, the steps ended abruptly, as if the man had dissolved into the air. Some speculated that he had fallen into a crevice. In these places, the ground was treacherous, under the thick snow, yawning black abysses could hide, endless and unyielding. But even crevices should leave traces. Broken crust, displaced snow, a funnel. Here, nothing. When the search resumed after a brief pause, the people discovered that the snow had completely erased all traces. Carl's footprints, the dog's prints, everything was gone. It was as if Antarctica itself had decided to wipe away the evidence. The silence was deceptive. The wind howled, the ice creaked, and at times it seemed that figures appeared on the horizon, figures no one could fully see. They vanished the moment anyone tried to look directly at them. This white emptiness played tricks on the mind. "This is impossible," said one of the searchers, crouching and staring at the icy expanse. His breath formed white clouds. Even if he fell, there should be something. But there was nothing. They called his name. They shouted into the blizzard so loudly that their voices grew hoarse. In response, they heard only an echo, dull, as if someone deep underground was repeating their cries. And the longer they called, the more distinct became the sense that someone, or something, was truly listening. By evening, as the group returned, the sky began to shimmer. Greenish waves of the aurora rolled across the horizon, and within this beauty, there was something unsettling. Then, amidst the aurora, other lights suddenly appeared. Bright, sharp, white, too precise to be natural. They moved as if someone were piercing the sky with beams from searchlights. On the horizon, a strange light appeared. It was unlike the northern lights, white, precise, like a spotlight, moving between hills and cracks. "This isn't a natural phenomenon," said a technician. "Look how it moves." "See," whispered the technician named Jean, pressing his hand against the glass. "This isn't the aurora." The others were silent. No one wanted to agree, yet denial was impossible. The lights hovered over the horizon for several minutes, then vanished. At the same instant, the wind intensified, roaring so loudly that the metal beams in the huts rattled. It seemed as if the station itself had become a musical instrument, played by an invisible giant. That night, no one slept peacefully. On the third day after the disappearance, one of Carl's colleagues, going through his personal belongings, found a notebook. The pages were filled with tiny handwriting, and with each entry it became clear, in the past weeks, Carl had been changing. Sometimes it feels like the snow is speaking. When I walk from the lab to the station, I hear voices. They are quiet, as if calling from beneath the ice. I thought it was my imagination, but today the voice was clear. It spoke my name. My dreams have become strange. I see an underground city glowing with blue light. Tall towers, like icy spires. And always the same feeling, they are waiting for me there. Calling. Promising to show something important. I am afraid to tell the others. They will think I've gone mad. But I know, this is not just a dream. Someone is truly trying to reach me. Reading these lines, the people felt the cold penetrate deeper than any clothing could shield. It was a different cold, not from the wind, but from the understanding that Carl might have been walking towards something unseen. A week passed, and hope was nearly gone. The storms grew stronger, and every venture outside became a battle for survival. The very footprints had finally disappeared under the snow. Carl's tracks, the dog's tracks, everything was gone. It was as if Antarctica itself had decided to erase the last proof that Carl had ever existed. He might as well have never lived here, said one of the men, his voice almost hysterical. Everyone felt the same. Carl had vanished not only into the desert, but from their memory. The station itself seemed unwilling to remember. At night, the wind howled beyond the hut walls, and sometimes, within that howl, footsteps could be heard. A few days later, the radio operator on duty had a nervous breakdown. He claimed he could hear Carl's voice in the headphones. "He was calling me," he shouted, waving his arms. He said, "I am near. I am beneath you. Come to me." They calmed him, laid him on a bunk, gave him a strong sedative. But the others understood, he could have been hearing the same things Carl had heard. From that day on, everyone feared the night shifts. The wind rustled in the wires, the radio crackled, and it seemed that words hid in those sounds. Some heard a name. Others, faint laughter. No one dared admit that they could hear it too. The station had several sled dogs. They lived near the huts, in pens, and everyone was used to their barking, their heavy breathing at night. For polar explorers, a dog was not only a helper but also a kind of guardian. If the dog was calm, everything was fine. Carl had a favorite, a large husky named Sam. He always accompanied him to the radio laboratory and back. After his master disappeared, Sam howled for several days, staring toward the direction where the tracks ended. His howls were piercing, as if he knew something the humans could not understand. Then, one night, Sam vanished. The rope he had been tied to was torn, and deep paw prints led into the same direction Carl had once gone. He went after him, someone said in a trembling voice. And the dog was never seen again. This loss shattered the crew's sense of stability. If even the animal could not resist, then there truly was something out there. With each passing day, tension among the crew grew. People began to suspect each other. Some said Carl might have fled intentionally, perhaps to desert or even contact the Soviets, the enemy that haunted American minds in those years. He was too secretive, said the mechanic James. He never really shared what he was working on. Who knows? Maybe he was recruited. But others disagreed. If this were espionage, he wouldn't have left like that. This is something else. And once again, the conversation returned to the things no one wanted to say aloud, the strange lights, the voices in the wind, Carl's journals. Everyone sensed that behind his disappearance there was something non-human. Weeks passed, and exhaustion and tension began to take their toll. People started having dreams, identical, terrifyingly similar. They dreamed of immense underground ice halls, vaulted and glowing blue. Within these halls stood columns that could not belong to nature. Someone walked these corridors, and everyone knew, it was Carl. One searcher woke up screaming, insisting he had seen Carl standing on an ice bridge, reaching out a hand to him. Another technician claimed, one night, to have seen a figure in the blizzard, tall, wrapped in furs, carrying a lantern. But when they ran outside, there was no one there. These nightly visions gnawed at their sanity. Every time the wind howled beyond the walls, they felt it brought not only cold, but also foreign dreams. Years passed. Carl's disappearance became a legend at the station, spoken of only in whispers. But in 1971, something occurred that revived old fears. One day, at another American base in Antarctica, the radio operators intercepted a strange signal. It was weak, intermittent, but the words were discernible, "This is Carl Dish. I am alive. Do not think this is a mistake." Everything was planned. The recording was preserved in the archives, and many considered it a prank or a technical glitch. But those who knew the story of his disappearance listened in stunned silence. The voice truly sounded like him. "Planned," repeated the station chief at the time, his fingers trembling as he held the reel of tape. "What does that mean?" And that night, the lights appeared again. Over the years, countless theories emerged. Some said Carl had lost his mind and deliberately walked into the storm to end his life. But then why were his tracks so straight, so confident? Others claimed he had fallen into a crevasse, but then, where was the sign of the fall? There were those who believed in stranger explanations, that voices beneath the ice had called him, that he had entered a city hidden beneath the permafrost. And the darkest whispered, he did not die. He went to those who dwell here longer than humans. Perhaps they are the ones who sometimes return his voice to the radio waves. Sometimes, people tried to imagine what Carl saw in his final moments. Perhaps he walked across the snow and suddenly noticed a blue glow piercing through the ice. Perhaps he heard a call, soft, insistent. And he stepped toward where darkness opened beneath the surface. Maybe he truly descended into the underground halls, and there saw what he had seen in his dreams, towers, glimmers, shadows moving between columns. Perhaps he is still there. By mid-May, the blizzards had intensified. It seemed that Antarctica itself had decided to erase the memory of Carl's disappearance. The wind howled as if laughing at humanity's futile attempts to find anything. The station froze in endless darkness and the roar of the hurricane. And yet, even beneath this roar, another sound could sometimes be heard, a low, steady beat, like the hammering of a giant heart under the ice. No one wanted to speak of it aloud, but everyone heard it. And one night, the storm seemed to cut through with a voice, "Carl." When the blizzard briefly subsided, the decision was made, one last attempt. The crew formed a chain, moving step by step toward where the tracks had vanished. Torches, flares, and searchlights cut through the darkness. Someone stumbled, someone fell from exhaustion, but they pressed on. Suddenly, one of the polar explorers shouted, a glint appeared in the snow. It was Carl's glove. Dry, hard, like stone. But there was no body nearby, no new tracks. Only smooth ice, as if everything around had been swept clean by an invisible broom. A few days later, strange occurrences began to happen directly at the station. In the dead of winter, the living quarters smelled of salt and seaweed, as if someone had stepped straight from the ocean. Yet the nearest coast lay hundreds of kilometers away. The radio operators reported interference resembling the echoes of whale songs. The metal walls of the huts trembled, as if distant waves were reaching them. "Something has opened here," said one of the veterans. "And Carl is now part of it." No one could say exactly where the rumors began. But soon everyone was saying the same thing: Carl had been taken by creatures that live under the ice. Not humans, not animals, but ancient inhabitants of the frozen world. Some saw shadows with long arms and glowing eyes in their dreams. Some heard footsteps beneath the hut floors. And everyone felt, if you stare into the white void for long enough, it will stare back. When the official search was called off, the station fell silent. But this was no ordinary silence. It was tense, eerie. The polar explorers began to fear venturing out into the blizzard even during the day. Every rustle sounded like footsteps, every reflection, a watching eye. And when a newcomer finally asked the veterans what had happened to Carl Dish, they answered simply, "He is now part of Antarctica." Years passed. In 1971, the radio operators heard his voice again. It repeated, "I am alive. Everything was planned. Do not look for me." The voice was calm, almost serene. After this transmission, the radio noise subsided for a long time. Those who listened said there was no pain in the words. There was choice. Antarctica is not just a continent. It is a temple of ice and wind, where human lives dissolve into the whispers of the storm. Carl Robert Dish disappeared, and no one knows what truly happened to him. Yet every year, when a blizzard howls over the station, the polar explorers sometimes hear his footsteps in the snow. Sometimes the dogs begin to howl toward the void. And in the radio waves, strange interferences still occur, soft, fragmentary, resembling voices. The radio operators whisper, this is Carl reminding them of himself. And perhaps it is true. Perhaps Antarctica simply has not let him go. Or perhaps he never wanted to leave. The ice keeps its secrets. Sometimes, when the wind howls, you can hear whispers, Carl's footsteps, calling those brave enough to step into the white void. Antarctica is a place ruled by cold, silence, and mystery. And everyone who crosses its boundaries learns that the white emptiness keeps its secrets forever.